It looks like Zootopia is going to get more movies going forward, since the second feature film was a success and ended with a clear setup for a sequel. But did you know that the entire story of this incredible franchise could have been completely different? Shock collars. The first Zootopia movie has a very mature story, even when compared to other Disney features that try to appeal to both kids and adults. However, the original script for the production was so dark that it had to be completely rewritten. Both the first and the second Zootopia tackle the theme of prejudice in a way that is already heavy, but still light enough for children to watch. That would not have been the case in the original version of the first film. In it, Nick and all predators would be forced to wear shock collars that would electrocute them whenever they felt strong emotions, in order to prevent them from attacking prey. But just to be clear, the collar would not shock only a predator who was furious. The shock would be activated at the slightest sign of any strong emotion, including happiness, forcing all predators to avoid getting excited about anything in order to escape the shock. This would be extremely cruel and would make the animated film very disturbing. This is just the beginning of the sad and tragic original story of Zootopia. You know what's starting. It's another awesome Cinewave! Boars. One of the many new elements in Zootopia 2 is the police boars who hunt Nick, Judy, and Gary, but they were not created for the sequel. In fact, they were meant to be important characters in the first film before the original script was completely scrapped. In this version, they would also play the role of enemies who hunt the main characters. More specifically, they would specialize in hunting predators, and their main target would become Nick. You'll understand the reason for this very soon, but we can guarantee it's not because he was trying to save a snake's life or anything like that. Reptiles in Zootopia 2 were not the focus of this story, just like in the final version of the first film. Looking at it this way, Zootopia 2 would end up being somewhat different if the first movie's script had never changed, since the boars probably wouldn't be used as secondary villains twice in a row. Main character. Another thing that would change here is the roles of Nick and Judy. In the end, Judy took on the role of the main character in Zootopia, with the story following her point of view. However, Nick would have been the protagonist in the original script. After all, in the final version, both predators and prey suffer prejudice, just in different ways. In the original script, however, predators are far more victimized than prey, so it makes perfect sense for Nick to be the main character in that version. But when the shock collar idea was removed for being too dark, turning Judy into the protagonist came naturally, since she is a newcomer to the city and discovers Zootopia alongside us, the audience. Collar removed. One of the most emotional scenes from that original script was even animated, although it was never finished. In it, Nick goes to a veterinary clinic and has his collar removed for an inspection. You can see how afraid everyone would be of predators, since there would be a whole careful process to remove Nick's collar safely. When his collar was removed, the fox felt relieved for the first time in a very long while. Nick even began to feel as if he were running through a field, as if he were finally experiencing freedom without the fear of being shocked at any moment. This scene easily makes anyone feel happy and sad at the same time, because it's heartwarming to see Nick so content, but it's also deeply depressing to realize that he felt chained for so many years before finally finding freedom again. The saddest part is that this happiness lasted only a few seconds, since the collar was put back on him after the inspection ended. Nick already has a sad story in Zootopia, but you can see how his life would have been even more tragic in this version of the script. If you think so too, leave a comment below with #sad so we know. Amusement park. The experience Nick would have gone through when his collar was removed would lead him to come up with the brilliant idea of creating an amusement park for predators called Wild Times. The idea was for him to set up a front veterinary clinic that would serve only to temporarily remove predators' collars and lead them to a secret entrance that would give access to an incredible amusement park. According to what the creators of Zootopia said, this park would feature several incredible attractions designed specifically for predators, such as attractions where they could scratch with their claws and things like that, as if predators could follow their natural instincts in that place without judgment. It even somewhat resembles the area of Zootopia where animals can walk around without clothes, since both allowed animals to reconnect with nature. This amusement park would be very important to the film, since Nick's main goal would be to build it in order to give predators at least a moment of peace in their lives. Because of that, removing it from the script ended up changing the entire story of the production. Even so, it would be really cool if this park showed up in Zootopia 3, even if it were just as an Easter Easter egg: Nick's father. Many people wonder who Nick's father is. Before Zootopia 2 was released, a very popular theory was that the movie's villain would secretly be Nick's father, but now we know that wasn't the case, and the Fox's family remains a true mystery. That would not have been the case in the original version of the first Zootopia, in which there would be flashbacks showing Nick as a child with his father. The flashbacks would show that his father tried to open a tailor shop, a store that makes custom-made clothing. In this case, he wanted the place to be designed to serve all types of mammals. The name of the tailor shop would be Zootopia. Nice, right? But the shop would go bankrupt before the start of the movie, probably when Nick was still a child. In other words, his father had a dream of uniting all mammals through his project, but he wasn't able to achieve it, which would be yet another reason for Nick to want to create an amusement park for predators. Koslov. You know Koslov, the polar bear who works for Mr. Big? Originally, he would have had much more importance throughout the entire film. That's because Nick wouldn't be able to convince any company to fund his amusement park project, which certainly wouldn't be cheap. Because of that, he would have to turn to alternative means to get money for the project. In this case, Nick would convince Koslov to sponsor his amusement park. Yes, believe it or not, he was willing to use criminal money in order to make this project happen. Here, Koslov would not work for Mr. Big. He would be the main criminal of the story, owning a nightclub and everything else. Even though he remained in the film after the story was rewritten, the character changed a lot and lost relevance. But don't be fooled, Koslov was far from being as friendly as Mr. Big. He would only help Nick in order to receive a large portion of the money generated by the amusement park later on, so he would also end up being a threat to Nick. Nick arrested. Another similarity between Zootopia 2 and the initial version of the first film is that Nick ends up being arrested in the new movie, something that would also have happened in the first Zootopia if the script had remained the same. That's because the government would eventually discover Nick's amusement park. But the bizarre part is that his arrest would happen in a truly terrible way, with a secret agent injecting the venom that makes animals lose control into Nick, forcing him to attack everything he saw in front of him. Then, the police would arrest Nick as if he were a real monster. This once again shows how Zootopia 2 would need to be completely different. Besides not being able to rely on the boars as enemies, Nick couldn't end up being arrested because that idea would have already been used in the first film, and those things can't be repeated in movies. And if you're not subscribed yet, you know what to do. Click and hit the bell so you don't miss any videos. Wooly. Additionally, the secret agent responsible for poisoning Nick would have been Wooly, a lamb who disguised himself as a wolf to commit his crimes. Yes, exactly the opposite of the phrase, a wolf in sheep's clothing. One of his jobs would be to eat documents that expose the government's dirty secrets. The character did not remain in the final version, but he was used as the basis for creating two other characters. One of them is Doug, the chemist who works for Bellwether, creating the serum that drives animals insane and firing the serum at the villain's targets. The other character is an unnamed ram who also works for Bellwether, because he has exactly the same appearance as Wooly. Still, it's a shame that there isn't any lamb in the final version who uses that tactic of disguising himself as a wolf. Mayor Swinton. The villain of this darker version of Zootopia would still be the mayor, but it wouldn't be Mayor Bellwether. Instead, it would be Mayor Swinton, a pig. The reason for this is that pigs are among the most intelligent animals that exist, so it would make sense for a pig to be the city's mayor and also a master manipulator whose goal is to ensure that predators have as little power as possible within society, just like Bellwether. The difference is that Bellwether was doing this in a world where predators had almost the same rights as prey, while Swinton would already be operating in a world where predators suffered much more. If we stop to think about it, this macabre version of Zootopia is exactly what the city would end up becoming in the future if Judy and Nick had never managed to uncover Bellwether's plans. Prison escape. Just like in Zootopia 2, Nick would find a way to escape from prison, and we would see an incredible chase scene. The ironic part is that the one chasing him would be none other than Judy Hopps. And best of all, a large part of the scene would take place in the rodents mini-city. In the final movie, this idea was reused, but instead of chasing Nick, Judy chased a small-time thief. There would also be a scene after that in which Judy would swear during an interview that she would manage to catch Nick, which would give the two of them an enemies-only relationship for part of the movie. Fortunately, that would change, and Judy would eventually team up with the Fox to defeat Mayor Swinton, Koslov's son. At this point, it's easy to see that this movie would have many scenes capable of moving even the coldest person in the world, and one of those scenes would involve Koslov and his son, who was completely cut from the final script. Taking place on Koslov's son's birthday, the scene would show the boy receiving his shock collar, since he had reached the age at which wearing the collar becomes mandatory. mandatory. This is treated as a rite of passage for a predator entering a new phase of life, because they try to see a positive side to it. The boy would even start to celebrate, but he would get so excited that the collar would activate and shock him. Then Koslov would be clearly devastated and would hug his son in an attempt to comfort him. This moment shows the harsh reality of this version of Zootopia, a disturbing world in which predators are forced to suffer in silence. It's easy to understand why Disney abandoned this script, since the story would truly follow a very dark path and would leave many children traumatized. But we have to admit it would actually be interesting to watch this tragic version of Zootopia. What do you think? It's almost over, but until then you can stay with us. There are 2 super fun videos waiting for you. Thanks, and see you next time.